we want to talk about some of the free agents that are available in the 2024 offseason that the Bears might target. I think most Bears fans can agree where the holes on this team lie. I think we're looking at, defensive line. I think we're looking at another wide receiver to pair up with DJ Moore. I think we're definitely looking at centers. So those are just some of the positions we're kind of going to look into today. And David, let's start this off with wide receivers. And this is in no particular order. I just kind of went and, found a good handful of guys, took just some stats from their last 3 years and kind of just looked up their potential market value according to Spot Track. The first guy we're going to look at today is Michael Pittman Jr. from the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Michael Pittman Jr. is 26 years old. In 2021, he had 88 catches for 1,082 yards, 6 touchdowns. 2022, 99 catches. It was just shy of that 1,000-yard marker with 4 touchdowns. 2023, 109 catches, 1,152, 4 touchdowns, and his Spot Track market value is actually pretty high. 4 years, $90.8 million, at around $22.8 million a year. I mean, this guy is a number one wide receiver, and he puts up some legitimate numbers. David, what are your thoughts on him?
I really like him. He reminds me very much of like DJ Moore in terms of situation. I think he's super talented. He's a number one wide receiver. He cycles through quarterbacks, which is kind of just the unfortunate part, right? He can never really put together good chemistry with whoever his starting quarterback is, and he kind of just keeps rotating through him, similar to DJ Moore. But the guy just produces over and over and over again, right? So he's 26, which is in a really great age to kind of hit free agency. In an ideal world, I'd love Michael Pittman Jr. You get the Colts connection back to Eberflus. You get all these other things. I just think he might be too expensive. Is that big body receiver that the Bears are missing on the other side? He's basically the what idea Chase Claypool would have been, right? He's like 6'4". I want to say he's like 215, 220. So he's like a really good, not just a big body, but he's a good route runner. He can get open. I think ideally he would have been a perfect combo, or he is kind of what you're hoping. Maybe like if you draft Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rome Odunze, like that's what he is. He's just a much more known commodity. If Michael Pittman leaves Indianapolis, wherever he goes, he's going to probably be an absolute stud with a good quarterback. I'd love to see him on the Bears. I just don't see the Bears committing that much money to 2 wide receivers when every year there's new rookie wide receivers kind of coming in and kind of showing up right away. So Michael Pittman's going to end up being somebody's number one, like a clear number one. But since DJ Moore's already there, I think, unfortunately, it just doesn't match up perfectly. But I'd love to see him here.
That's why the finances really do play a role in all this. He's a great wide receiver. He might be too expensive. I don't know what their total value or commitment of money towards the wide receiver room is, but whatever idea they have, they are already paying DJ Moore. So with this next guy that we're going to look at, it might be kind of the same thing where the situation might not just make sense financially, but hey, we're still going to take a look at some of these guys, right? Because you never know. So we're going to take a look at Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans off the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 30 years old. In 2021, he had 74 catches for a little bit over 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. 2022, 77 catches, 1,124 yards, 6 touchdowns. And then last year, 79 catches for 1,235 yards with 13 touchdowns. Spot Track has him, earning a 4-year, $95.3 million deal. Same thing, $23.8 million a year, a little bit more expensive than even a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. But what do you think of Mike Evans?
You can get him on a shorter deal if he's willing to kind of do I don't know who would be a good comparison late in their career, maybe like these short, highly lucrative deals, kind of DeAndre Hopkins style, going to a team that you wouldn't really expect. But DeAndre Hopkins apparently just was not that desired at the end. I think Mike Evans is going to be just like incredibly highly touted. To any team that gives him a 4-year deal, good luck with that. Wide receivers, generally speaking, kind of fall off a cliff. Not necessarily where they just don't produce anymore, but they definitely will produce much, much less. And within a year or two, I can't imagine Mike Evans producing anywhere near 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns. Maybe he will. Maybe I'll be wrong. But I think for the Bears, you're nowhere near where you are in terms of talent and competitiveness to justify like a 2-year, $50 million contract and mess up your cap space for the next like year or two. And again, we talk about receiver just being like this, depth position. And For me, and this is why, this goes always back to how this team is constructed and who we think is a good quarterback here. I always think that a good quarterback or an above average quarterback will make his receivers better. And if you need DJ Moore, Mike Evans, and then a rookie first rounder to look, you know, serviceable or passable or look good, I think that's just, you're asking too much.
We look at a guy, and I know he's one of your favorites, like Calvin Ridley. Now, Calvin Ridley, man, time passes you by. He's already 29 years old, which kind of stuck out to me a little bit. For some reason, I still thought he was much younger, but yeah, it is what it is. So I actually went back through his last 4 years, because you see that 2022 year suspended. That's the big red flag on his resume right there. But in 2020, he had 90 catches for 1,374 yards and 9 touchdowns. In 2021, I believe there was some injury there because he only had 31 catches, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns. 2022, he got suspended for gambling. And 2023, he had 76 catches for just over 1,000 yards with 8 touchdowns. It kind of looked like he went back to that 2020 year he had as far as the statistical numbers go. And SpotTrack has him calculated at 4 years, $68.2 million, $17 million a year. David, I know I always joke around with you on this guy. I know he's definitely one of your favorites. What do you think about his future, though, moving forward in the NFL?
It's not so much that he's one of my favorites. I just think he's a really good player at his value. I think when you talk about value, Ryan Poles, when that trade went down with Atlanta, the 5th to the conditional 2nd, that always stood out to me as like, you were always planning for the future. Essentially, Chase Claypool sat that whole end of the year anyway. I mean, in all intents and purposes, the guy barely played. And when he did play, he was just irrelevant. So that was one of those things where I'm like, why would you sit? Why would you take Claypool? And then, I understood the public pressure and all that, but like, if your plan was the future, imagine this year coming out with Calvin Ridley, or last year, Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore.
Oh yeah, if we got 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns out of Chase Claypool, he'd still be here.
Exactly. So that was one of those things that it just frustrated me looking back on it. I thought the risk reward was much greater on Calvin Ridley than Chase Claypool, and I never really liked Chase Claypool's trade to begin with, but it is what it is. Right now, Calvin Ridley is super intriguing. He's interested in joining the Bears, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I saw a social media post where he, mentioned something about playing for the Bears. And I think he's kind of in that right age of, hey, he still has something to prove. He's not really looking to break the bank, I would imagine. I would think, and this is me being just me, I always imagine players would take maybe $2 or $3 million less to go to a competitive team, a Super Bowl winning team. But as we know, like for a lot of players in the NFL, it's a job. They're there to make the most money and get out, right? Take care of their families and all that. And I understand all that. I think it'd just be a really interesting pairing if you get Calvin Ridley. I think that takes a lot of pressure off the first round and the second round to go and get like a really top tier, second person to DJ Moore. I think the value wise, it's there. I wouldn't do a 4-year deal. If he's willing to take like 2 or 3 at like 17 mil a year, I'd be much more interested. He's a bit of a risk reward player, but if you can get him at the right price, I think that's a good complementary receiver. Since you are going to be running 3 wide receivers on this new potential Bears offense, regardless of who's quarterback, you need depth. You need 4 or 5 guys that can kind of pop in there. So you more than likely will spend money on one guy this offseason. This might be the one. We'll see.
Well, moving on, the next guy we're going to look at is Gabriel Davis off the Buffalo Bills. In 2021, he had 63 catches for 549 yards, 6 touchdowns. 2022, he had 48 catches, 836 yards for 7 touchdowns. 2023, he had 45 catches for 746 yards and 7 touchdowns. His market value is sitting at 4 years, $54.5 million, which is about $13.6 million a year. As you can see, this guy definitely pretty consistent throughout the last couple of years. He's only 24 years old.
Gabe Davis to me is exactly what kind of his stats show. He is very solid. He's a decent route runner for his size, right? Like he's 6'2", 225, nice size. But when you have Josh Allen at quarterback and Stephon Diggs for 2 of those years, like taking that much attention away, I think 2022 showed exactly like his peak. And I'm not sure if it's nice that he's a young age and you can get him as like a rotation guy, but I don't think I would be comfortable. Like if I say like it's my money, but um, I think at $13 million a year, you better know for a fact you have a quarterback who can maximize the potential of what Gabe Davis can do. Because I don't think Gabe Davis will significantly increase your quarterback's abilities, right? I don't think he's doing anything on his own that makes the quarterback significantly better. He's a really, really solid plug and play wide receiver. He's probably a solid second receiver, which in theory, that's what you need from DJ Moore's counterpart. And then you get, like a much younger guy. And at 24, you could potentially hope that there's a lot of upside still in Gabe Davis. Um, I feel like those numbers that we see, though, are very misleading. And I think some team is going to probably overpay Gabe Davis. If it's the Bears, I wouldn't be upset, but I would be kind of like, I would have liked something a little bit more concrete or something that's a little bit more complementary to what the Bears need.
Okay, well, moving on to the next guy, we're going to look at our very own Darnell Mooney, 26 years old. In 2021, he had 81 catches for 1,055 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2022, he had 40 catches, 493 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's the year he got hurt. And in this last year, he had career low, 31 catches, 414 yards with 1 touchdown. Spotrac still has him at, 4 years, 42 million, 10.4 million a year potentially. What do you think about holding on to Darnell Mooney?
If he's willing to take a hometown deal, like under 10 million, I think you're still risking a lot because you've seen what he does and what he can do. Um, I think he's not a good complement to DJ Moore anymore than in what we thought theoretically he could be. He's a small, undersized, like outside receiver, I think, and I think you've got to like use him the right way. Maybe if Shane Waldron knows what to do with a guy like Darnell Mooney and he's super confident, he likes him, I'd be fine with it, I guess. It just all depends with how the Bears want to see him. But I don't I think injuries are already a problem, clearly, right? The drop off has been consistent. And I think he's ready for a fresh start, and I think the Bears are too. So I think it's just one of those everything aligns to have a good mutual parting of ways. So if you really like him as a organization and he's just a good guy and you want to keep him here for a few years and Justin likes him and he stays and however they want to handle it, I mean it's it is what it is, but if that's who you trot out as your number 2 next year or maybe even your number 3, I don't feel confident in his growth.
Okay, well, the next guy we're going to take a look at is Chark, DJ Chark Jr., 27 years old. In 2021, he had 22 catches for only 154 yards, 2 touchdowns. 2022, 52 catches, 500 yards, 3 touchdowns. 2023, 66 catches, 525 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And he is looking at a value of 1 year, 10.9 million a year. David, what do you think of DJ Chark Jr.?
DJ Chark is to me like the almost perfect risky type of 1-year deal you should take for Shane Waldron. He is a very fast 6'3", 6'4" guy. And if you need somebody on the other side of the field just to kind of imitate, I'm not even comparing, it's not the implication, but imitate DK Metcalf, right? You want a 6'2", 6'3" guy with just like pure speed to stretch the field on one side so that you can open the offense on the other side, right? Or just like make safeties respect it or bite. Yeah, that's like the perfect kind of frame, body, age. He probably wants to go play with somebody who can maybe show, he probably is like, hey, I've been signing these 1-year deals. I think I'm better than this. I think I should be a 2 or a 3, but right now he's like a 4 on most teams, like a legitimate cores.
And David, he is coming off the Panthers where he's played there for 5 years. So he has plenty of experience playing with DJ Moore.
Yeah, that too. So like communication within the locker room, just if he's a nice guy and even if they just text each other, you have that decent amount of connection. Even if you put him on a 2-year deal and then, he ends up sliding down the depth chart next year I think there's upside to be had on a decently priced deal. And I think we're comparing it to Darnell Mooney. We just said how I don't want Darnell Mooney. This guy's a year older with, similar stats in the last 2 years. The difference is the frame and what they do, right? Like you need a guy to stretch the field. You need a third wide receiver who's big and fast and a big target. Darnell Mooney's not that guy. DJ Chark is definitely a better option in terms of complementary building a wide receiver room. So I would be okay with like a 1 or 2 year deal for DJ Chark.
So the next guy we're going to look at is, I think, personally, my favorite option out of all these, and it's Tyler Boyd. I know he's 29 years old. In 2021, he had 67 catches for 828 yards, 5 touchdowns. In 2022, 58 catches, 762 yards, 5 touchdowns. 2023, 67 catches, 667 yards, 2 touchdowns. But his value, 3 years, 26.1 million, 8.7 million a year. I think this guy's a great value. I think he brings a lot to the table.
I agree. I think he has experience kind of playing multiple roles. Like he's always playing wide receiver, but in terms of what he's done, he kind of went from, being like a second guy to being a third guy now with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, right? He's played with a multitude of quarterbacks and kind of still produced through it. He's not the speed guy that DJ Chark would be, but it's very rare to find like track speed at receiver that also is good and can run routes. It's a rare combination. But he is a bigger body. He's like 6'2". He's a little thinner frame, so he's in that way, but stays healthy. Like you said, I think it's an interesting person to put in there because he's 29. He'd be a very, very good, like mature figure in the wide receiver room. If you do draft somebody that's similar to him, if you still, you could take Tyler Boyd, feel confident that he would be your number 2 during the season when it opened up. And you also could like roll him into the number 3 spot if you do take like a first round receiver, if you feel like you want to invest in that position at like the second round or first round. And I feel like I agree with you. He's very versatile, but the problem with that is a lot of teams are probably going to feel the same way. So I think that 3 years, 26 million is like very accurate, if not a little under. He'll probably get a 3-year deal, maybe at like $10 million a year. And if we're wrong about that, I'd be surprised and I'd be very excited. Like just hop on that Tyler Boyd contract, 2 to 3 years, play him until he's 32. That's like the right age to have a contract expire for a wide receiver. And like you said, he's one of my favorites on the options too, because he kind of fits multiple roles that you're hoping that each guy would, right? Like the older veteran guys that we talked about at the beginning that you don't want to pay that much to, similar to like DJ Chark, or the younger guys that you want to experiment with, maybe have them step up a little bit. At 29, that's rare, but it's not impossible. And then you can kind of transition him out of the team and then have your younger guys step up. So I'm a fan too. That's probably my first or second choice as well.
We're going to take a look at some of the free agent pass rushers in the 2024 offseason, and we're going to start it off with a guy that's definitely probably one of our favorites, somebody who the Bears have had interest in even when trading the number 1 overall pick. It was, hey, we either want DJ Moore or we want Brian Burns. And Brian Burns, 25 years old, 9 sacks, 50 tackles, 2 forced fumbles in 2021. In 2022, 12.5 sacks, 63 tackles, 1 forced fumble. 2023, 8 sacks, 50 tackles, 1 forced fumble. Spot Track has him at 5 years, 108.7 million, 21.7 million a year. David, what do you think of Brian Burns?
To me, there's a few slam dunk free agency moves, because free agency is interesting and like in the way that obviously the player needs to be interested to come here too. If Brian Burns wants to be a Chicago Bear and that's the price, it's worth every penny. That will be one of Chicago's new favorite players, I think, for the next 5 years. If you give him 5 years at 22 million even, that's a comparable contract to Montez Sweat, and he's 25. Montez Sweat, I think, is what, 28, 27, right? So if you're willing to give that contract to Montez Sweat, that's a no-brainer, slam dunk. If Brian Burns wants to be here and you want to pay 22 million, sure, you're going to invest a lot of money at defensive end. There's no other position in the NFL that I would be more comfortable in, even if one of those guys gets hurt. You still have another guy on the other side that backs him up and can still apply pressure. If both players are healthy, you have one of the most terrifying pass rush and defensive lines in the NFL day one, right away, ready to go. At 25 years old, like Brian Burns is one of my favorite players in the NFL in general. He plays the run well. He plays the pass well. He applies pressure. All the things line up. Man, if Brian Burns doesn't end up a Chicago Bear, I'm gonna be a little disappointed. I'm gonna be upset. Like, you should move heaven and earth. You should give him the best deal. You should be ready to pay him. And it's a value position. There's very few positions in the NFL where 5 years at 20 something million dollars a year are almost guaranteed to not bite you in the ass. And even if Brian Burns gets hurt for one of those seasons, but can still produce at that kind of consistent level, like 9, 12, 8 sacks on the other side of Montez Sweat, even if he got a terrible injury for like 1 year, that contract's still great. Like $22 million a year for 4 years of production at a defensive end. Sign me up. Let's go, ready to go. And now that frees you up so much in the draft to not look for a defensive end. Now you can really focus on like defensive tackle, a good 3-tech, right? Like, you can focus on the offensive side. You can focus on corner. I think it just frees up so much because that's such a valuable position also in the draft. We know this. Good defensive ends pretty much come first or second round every time.
That defensive end position can impact the game so much in so many ways. And that's why these guys do call in a ton of money, and it's worth paying them as long as that position pans out. When we look at these defensive guys that are producing in the NFL and where they were drafted, okay, yeah, you got Nick Bosa, first round, pick 2 overall. Mike Parsons, first round, pick 12 overall. Myles Garrett, first round, pick 1 overall. Brian Burns was pick 16 overall. TJ Watt, first round, pick 30 overall. Max Crosby's kind of an outlier here in the 4th round. Montez Sweat was even a first round pick. When you look at these guys that produce, they're high draft picks. They really are. Even when it comes to defensive tackles in this league, you see the same thing when it comes to drafting them. Aaron Donald, first round pick 13. Chris Jones, second round pick 37. Dexter Lawrence, first round pick 17. Quinnen Williams, first round pick 3. Cameron Hayward, first round pick 31. Forrest Buckner, first round pick 17. Jonathan Allen, first round pick 17. These guys get drafted high. And so there's, no surprise that in the free agency market, they demand large contracts as well. Let's take a look at the next guy here. Leonard Williams, 29 years old. In 2021, he had 6.5 sacks, 82 tackles, 2 forced fumbles. 2022, 2.5 sacks, 45 tackles, 1 forced fumble. I think he may have had some injury concern that year, or I think he may have spent some time out due to an injury that year. In 2023, he had 5.5 sacks, 62 tackles. His market value is 3 years, $50.1 million, $16.7 million a year. David, what do you think of Leonard Williams from the Seattle Seahawks?
Leonard Williams is okay at that age, and the fact that he, if I'm not mistaken, has traditionally played like a defensive end in a 3-4, which is pretty different from like a pass rushing 4-3 defensive end. He would be a very disappointing like 3rd or 4th choice of what I would see. I would rather have like Brian Burns and Neil Hunter, and then even maybe a possible just straight draft pick over Leonard Williams. But if you are just floundering in free agency, I don't know how many teams are going to be chomping at the bit for Leonard Williams, and I don't see a lot, but you never know. Free agency gets crazy, and you never know who gets, just kind of like a weird deal. For the Bears, I'm not seeing a big fit, nor do I see a logical fit.
Let's talk about the next guy here as a defensive end that's available in the 2024 free agency. We're looking at Jonathan Greenard off the Houston Texans, 26 years old. In 2021, he had 8 sacks, 33 tackles, 2 forced fumbles. 2022, 1.5 sacks, 16 tackles, 1 interception. I believe there was some injury that year. 2023, 12.5 sacks, 52 tackles, 1 forced fumble. Spot Track has him at 4 years, $53.8 million, $13.4 million a year. David, what do you think of Jonathan Greenard?
He feels like a very Ryan Polsey move, right? Like a guy who would be signed for his upside at an age that maybe was like, oh, I feel like a different team maybe could have used him better, or he's a little bit undervalued at $13 million. I think with 12.5 sacks and 8 sacks in 2021, that's clearly like a upward projection. So for 13.4 mil, I think that's a good value. He's similar stats minus 2022 to like a guy like Brian Burns, right? Except for almost half the money. So if you strike out on Brian Burns, Jonathan Greenard is like a pretty good second option, and it's an option that I would take as an upside signing at a good value, right? Because I'm preaching value all that time, and then that's a guy that you sign, and you would feel confident in him starting most games, but you probably want him in some sort of defensive line rotation, right? Because you don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to pull off everything every snap. Stats are great and all that, but on a down-to-down basis, I think, if you have Montez Sweat on the other side, Jonathan Greener might be a really great choice because what you just saw with like him and Will Anderson Jr. this year, right? It might be that kind of situation where he really needed a first guy to kind of take the pressure off of him so that he can play really, really well on the other side with a little less spotlight on him and step up. So it feels like a good upside signing at a good value. And it feels like a Ryan Poles thing. It feels like a Ryan Poles. I see something that other people might not, and I want to scoop this guy up before he becomes too expensive.
Say we do address that position in the draft with pick 9, for example, and we go off and get, a highly caliber defensive end or defensive tackle or something. We may just be looking for some rotational pieces and rotational guys. I think that's kind of what this next guy may be that we're going to look at. AJ Epinesa, 25 years old, from the New York Giants. 2021, he had 1.5 sacks, 14 tackles. 2022, 6.5 sacks, 16 tackles, 2 forced fumbles. 2023, 6.5 sacks, 20 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions. Spot Track has him 2 years, 11.3 million, 5.6 million a year. David, what do you think about Epinesa?
I think he's okay. Like you said, he's a good rotational guy if you strike out on really everybody. If I'm not mistaken, he's going to be much more of a 3-4 style, like defensive linebackers. Yeah, he projects to be much more of like a starting outside linebacker, like a pass rush linebacker. So, yeah, it's okay, but I think we've seen this experiment rarely work where you ask a 3-4 linebacker to kind of put his hand in the dirt consistently and then stop the run. Overall, I think it's a risky play, but like you said, at $5-6 million a year at 25 years old, I would love it as a rotation piece if you do address it in the draft and then you have him kind of backing that position up. It's a risky play, but it's a value play.
Recently, we've heard that a guy like Darnell Hunter may be available from the Vikings. No, Darnell Hunter, 29 years old. 2021, he had 6 sacks, 38 tackles. 2022, 10.5 sacks, 65 tackles, 1 forced fumble. And then last year, 16.5 sacks, 83 tackles, 4 forced fumbles. Spot Track has him looking at a 3-year, $60.1 million contract, $20 million a year. David, what do you think about Hunter?
To hamstring the Vikings and to steal him would be pretty huge. I think he's an amazing player. Another first rounder, right? We keep talking about these first rounders that are impact players. Really productive. The only 2 concerns I would have with Darnell Hunter's really the age, right? 29 tend to kind of get a little bit slower at 29, but Montez Sweat is not a very dissimilar age. The only other concerns I would have is he always plays well. He hasn't always. He's a good rotation guy. He's one of the few examples of a 3-4 guy and a 4-3 guy that kind of goes back and forth and is able to switch back. The only thing is, like, we watched Brian Flores' defense this year, and it was a heavy pressure, heavy blitzing kind of scheme. And if you look at the years before, it was a little bit more traditional, which I think is what the Bears run now. Matt Eberflus did kind of turn up the blitzes halfway through the year, right? And it kind of got a little bit more interesting, but I don't think we're ever going to see Matt Eberflus run anything like Brian Flores does. We're just, we're setting 6 or 7 guys 4 plays in a row. And if, Darnell Hunter's stats go up in his contract year with heavy pressure and a totally different defensive coordinator, I don't know if that translates to this defense as well. He's still great. It's still going to be a massive upgrade. He's going to look great on the other side of Montez Sweat. But those are the 2 concerns. Obviously, he'd probably be my second choice on this whole list, right? Next to Brian Burns.
Another guy that's available is Zadarius Smith. Now, we've seen this guy. I believe he started off his career on the Ravens. We saw him play on the Packers. We saw him play on the Vikings. He's currently on the Browns, but he's about to hit free agency at the age of 31. 2020, 12.5 sacks, 52 tackles, 3 forced fumbles. 2022, 10 sacks, 44 tackles, 1 forced fumble. And then last year, 5.5 sacks, 27 tackles, and 1 forced fumble. We're looking at a value of 2 years, 25 million, 12.4 million a year. David, what do you think about Zadarius Smith?
He is right up there with AJ Epinesa as like a potentially risky free agent choice, right? Definitely can play hand in the dirt. Definitely a 3-4 linebacker as well. So he's versatile. The age is getting scary, right? And you can see it in the statistics. It kind of drops off dramatically. I think he's probably your number one or number two choice if you've just decided to go young and in the draft, right? I think that's your perfect stopgap, 1 or 2 year deal, rotational guy. A 1 year deal, he'll definitely be here. His second year is, something like they could cut him and save some money if he just completely falls off a cliff. Or you ride him out and, let him go until the age of 33 until the younger guy's ready to take over in a rotational piece. But I'd like him a little bit better than maybe a guy like AJ Epineza with the options of, having a stopgap at defensive end, because you do need to clearly upgrade. It'd be a very situational choice. It'd be as a rotational down lineman as a stopgap measure for, the younger guy to come in and take over.
Next guy we're going to look at is a name that all Bears fans know. Leonard Floyd, 31 years old already. Wow, how time flies. In 2021, he had 9.5 sacks, 70 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception. 2022, 9 sacks, 59 tackles. And last year, he had 10.5 sacks, 32 tackles, 1 forced fumble. We're looking at a value of 2 years, $16.2 million, about $8 million a year. David, what do you think about bringing Leonard Floyd back to the Bears?
I would like to, for the same reasons we would bring in a guy like Zadarius Smith. I think Leonard Floyd really learned the game and learned the nuances of the game and progressed as he left the Bears. And I don't think he has any motivation to come back here. I think he's getting older, and he proved that he is. I'm blown away at the price tag, really, for him to be that cheap and that productive consistently still. I feel like Leonard Floyd is going to probably deserve a little bit more money and probably go to a better team that is a little bit more ready for a Super Bowl.
Next guy we're going to look at is Josh Allen. No, not the quarterback Josh Allen, but the defensive end pass rusher Josh Allen. He has had 7.5 sacks, 71 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception in 2021. Only 26 years old. In 2022, he had 6 sacks, 57 tackles, and 4 forced fumbles. 2023, he had 17.5 sacks, 66 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 1 interception. He's looking at a big contract. 5 years, $120 million, about $24 million a year. David, what do you think about the pass rusher, Josh Allen?
I think he knew he had a contract here coming up. I don't ever assume that NFL players phone it in or don't try as hard, but could be a combination of things. And really what you're looking at with Josh Allen and that stat line and his productivity, you're looking at either really 2 things. It all finally clicked, right, at the age of like 25, 26, which is totally possible because that's a lot of defensive ends. They kind of start off slow and then things start to click and then they start being a little bit more consistent, right? So that jump, though, is insane. It's a massive jump. It's from 7.5, 6, and then 17.5. You're adding 10 sacks per season. That, to me, is if he continues to do that, we're talking about one of the best defensive ends in the league. And I don't know if he's in that conversation yet, but he would deserve to be at that stat line. I didn't really see Jacksonville getting that much better on defense this year either. So that's why I kind of lean towards, he either just figured it out on how to play defensive end a little bit more nuanced and how to get more sacks specifically, or it was a bit of both.
It would definitely be an expensive signing. So we're going to look at a guy that doesn't have much production here, Josh Uche. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. 25 years old, off the New England Patriots. 2021, he had 3 sacks, 12 tackles. 2022, he had 11.5 sacks, 27 tackles, and 2 forced fumbles. But last year, just 3 sacks, 15 tackles. We're looking at a guy that's worth 2 years, $16.7 million, $8.3 million a year. David, what do you think about Josh Uche?
He's got, that 3-4 pedigree. So I think it's a lot to ask of a 25-year-old to kind of just completely change schemes, but it's not unheard of. And to me, this is one of those similar to like an Andrew Billings signing, right? Like it's a necessary piece. He might play both positions well. He might play the run well and give you just enough off the edge. And at that contract, I think it'd be just a really, really great value signing for what we've been talking about as a complementary piece in a rotation depth chart with a young guy kind of learning behind him. He's still young himself too, right? So he has something to prove. He's hungry. He wants to produce. He wouldn't want a rookie coming in and taking his job. And it might be a good, like, complementary, change of pace type player at a really good price tag. To me, when I sent you a few names, to me, Josh Uche just stood out as a little bit of like a a very value signing, very under the radar. He's up and down, obviously, 3 sacks, 11 and a half and 3. So you're looking at the upside.
A position of need for the Bears offense is definitely center. We've seen some terrible center play in the last several years. So if the Bears are going to sit there and address that position in free agency, we just took a quick handful of guys here, and we're going to take a look at Connor Williams from the Miami Dolphins, 26 years old. I just looked at the health aspect of it. In 2021, he played 14 games. 2022, he played the full season. Last year, he played 9 games. Spotrac got him at 2 years, 14 million, 7 million a year. David, what do you think about a guy like Connor Williams?
I think in this type of system that you're asking for potentially moving forward, I think Connor Williams looks probably like a really good situation for him. As you have down there, right? He only played 9 games, so injury kind of plagued him this season. But a 3-year starter, younger guy. At this point, as a Bears fan, I feel like I just want to see somebody with legs, somebody who can actually move and not just get pushed backwards every time. 26 years old. Overall rating for PFF was pretty good, 86.5. 1 sack allowed in 2023, and however, he does have a good amount of penalties for such a short amount of time. With the way that Miami plays, right, a lot of 3 and 4 guys, he probably is much more of a zone running scheme type center. I don't know how he would do necessarily with somebody who would be up in his face and pushing the pocket, but Tua seemed to do just fine. However, that could be a lot of Mike McDaniel there. I just can't stand to see another old guy there that we have. I don't want to see Lucas Patrick or Cody Whitehair. And Connor Williams feels like a good stopgap of somebody who is young enough to play now, has enough experience for me to trust them, and also just kind of have a young guy waiting in the wings, developing. And if he didn't work out, Connor Williams, then you're not breaking the bank. You could probably move on from him pretty quickly, and we're kind of back in the same situation we started with. But I think it'd be a definite upgrade. Anything's pretty much an upgrade at this point.
Next guy we're going to look at is Andre James off of the Raiders, 26 years old. 2021, he played 17 games full season, and then the last 2 years, he played 15 games in both those years. He's looking at 2 years, 8.6 million, 4.3 million a year. David, what do you think about Andre James from the Raiders?
This is a little bit more of like a solid guy, right? 3-year starter, like you said, the last few years, right in the middle of the pack in terms of player grades. There's an epidemic of just underperforming linemen in the NFL right now. It's a defensive line first type of situation. Very rarely. There's only really, 3 or 4 standout centers in the league as it is. But he's like right in the middle of the pack, and I would feel much more comfortable running him out there consistently. He's a consistent starter, very rarely gets hurt, only 4 sacks allowed over the 2023 season. 3 penalties, so he's not holding a lot. It'd be a very refreshing center over a guy like Lucas Patrick, who's falling down, trying to save his life and holding for dear life every play. And at that price, I mean, I don't know how you could really go wrong. So I'm a big fan of just upgrading with Andre James if he's willing to come here.
Next guy we're going to look at is Aaron Brewer from the Tennessee Titans, 26 years old. In 2021, he played 12 games. 2022, he played the full season. And last year, he just missed 1 game. He's looking at a value of 3 years, 15.7 million, about 5.2 million a year. David, what do you think about a guy like Aaron Brewer?
With a guy like Aaron Brewer, I mean, he's a great solid starter. He's a bit undersized for what you kind of expect from the center position. He's 6'1", 275 when usually centers hover around 300. So he's a bit undersized as more of an athletic type. A guy like Aaron Brewer, he's like the middle of the pack option in my mind. He's super consistent, plays almost every game. However, he holds up. He's a bit middle of the pack in terms of the PFF grades and all that stuff. Middle of the pack in terms of penalties, but he does allow a lot of sacks, which is what you would expect from like an undersized athletic lineman. He's allowed the second most sacks at the center position, so he's going to get bullied by defensive tackles, but he's going to be there. So I don't know if it's necessarily a huge upgrade for what we've seen, but Lucas Patrick, it doesn't get much worse.
The last center we're going to look at is Evan Brown from the Seattle Seahawks, 27 years old. In 2021, he played 12 games. In 2022, he played 12 games. And last year, he played 15 games. He's only looking at a 1 year, $2.2 million deal. And reason why we're going to talk about him is definitely the connection to our new offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, because he did play under him for the last couple of years. David, what do you think about a guy like Evan Brown?
To me, this feels like the most obvious signing, maybe for the Bears this whole offseason. My only concern is it feels a little Lucas Patrick-y in the sense of it's the same type of situation, right? Like Lucas Patrick was not a consistent starter at that position in Green Bay. However, he did start a few games, and Luke Getsy wanted somebody from his old regime to kind of come in and know his calls, know his signals, know how to like do line adjustments and stuff like that. At the price tag, I'm much more comfortable with Evan Brown. He's super middle of the pack. However, he's a consistent starter. Hasn't allowed a lot of sacks at the position because he's a little bit bigger of a guy, like 6'3", 320. However, he's highly penalized, sixth most penalties at center in the league, 7 penalties. That is to say, though, Lucas Patrick, if you didn't know this, 11 penalties all season for holding, one of the highest rates in the NFL. And so even that already is an upgrade. I think if you surround him with a decent guard on each side, at his size, he should be good. He is a bit of a journeyman, so like he is, to me, the stopgap measure. I don't feel comfortable with him starting the next 2 or 3 years, especially if you're drafting a young quarterback, or even if you're keeping Fields there. I think Fields has demonstrated he handles upfront pressure really, really rough. He's great at dodging a defensive end. If you could give him solid 3 guys up front, Fields has thrived. And then even with a young quarterback, we know what that is. A young quarterback's death sentence is pressure right in his face. So Evan Brown to me is like, yeah, you can sign him for a year or two, and it makes total sense. I feel like it's almost definitely going to happen, but you need to draft one of those two prospects in this year's draft. You got to get Jackson Powers Johnson, or you got to get Cedric Van Pran.